Hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're at in the world, and welcome for another Hornet Security webinar. Today we are decoding our annual cybersecurity report. As always, my name is Andy Serwich, and I've got Yvonne Bernard and Umut Alemdar with me. How's it going?
Great, how are you?
Doing good, doing good.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, definitely. It's great having both of you here. You know, you're both a wealth of knowledge in the security space, so it's going to be a really good conversation today. And we have a ton of stuff to get through, so I'm just going to kind of dive right in here and get us moving along here. So the first thing I want to talk about is our agenda for today's session. We're going to start with some introductions of ourselves, Hornet Security, the Security Lab, which is the group within Hornet Security that puts this report together. We'll talk about the report itself, what data is contained, what some of the methodologies are, and then we'll get to the core discussion, right? And really this is going to act as something of a roundtable type discussion where, you know, we kind of bring up a data point that's contained with the report and we kind of dissect it a little bit, talk about it, expand on it, et cetera, et cetera. At that point, we'll finish up with some wrap up and some Q&A at the end. Real quick word about the Q&A. So if you have any questions, or being this is a very discussional type of format for a webinar, even if you just have a comment that you want to add to the discussion today, go ahead and use that questions form within GoToWebinar, and that's kind of how you can interact with us, right? Just drop it in the questions form. If it's a question or a comment that's relevant to the discussion that we've got going on, I'll be sure to include it in our discussion. Otherwise, like I said, we do have a dedicated Q&A section at the end of the webinar where we will cover your question there. And if for some reason we run out of time, we don't get your question answered, we always do some sort of follow-up mailer or a follow-up blog post or podcast where we will get that question answered in some way, shape, or form. So that's some introductions. Again, my name is Andy Serwich. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years now. I am a Microsoft MVP in the cloud and data center management competency, and I'm a security evangelist here at Hornet Security. So love talking about security, especially with my esteemed colleagues here, Yvonne and Umut. And Yvonne, with that, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Yvonne Bernard. I'm a CTO at Hornetsecurity since 2021. In my former life, I was a researcher at the University of Hanover. I was doing publications on different topics, which are mainly system architecture, security cloud, AI, and machine learning. I have to admit it's some time ago, so things have moved on, but the basics are still there. And after my time as a researcher, I joined Hornet Security first as the personal assistant to our CEO, Danny Hofmann. I learned the business side of security from him. Then I took over product management for more than 5 years, and now I'm responsible for product management, product development, our innovation and research team, who are basically building prototypes of things we think are probably possible technically, and our very own security lab.
Very cool. Well, I love having you on this webinar today, Yvonne. It's great getting your opinion on these things, especially as we start getting into the I guess what I would call the crystal ball phase of the discussion later on, where we start talking about next year, right? So I, again, appreciate you being here.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, definitely. And Umut, I'll let you introduce yourself, my friend.
Thank you, Andy. I'm Umut Alemdar. I joined Hornet Security in 2013, so a little bit more than 10 years ago. Before that, even as a kid, I loved tinkering with IT devices. I hacked into gaming consoles, tried to repair old IT devices and so on. And because of that, I wanted to keep working on complex IT systems. What can be more complex than IT security? I joined Hornet Security to follow my hobbies more or less. And here I became the head of security lab around 2019. So in my position, I lead 3 teams here responsible for the internal security at Hornet Security, but also I'm responsible for our threat research, spam analysts here at Hornet Security, and also the development of our threat defense, anti-phishing solutions and so on. I have a very hands-on attitude, so I am very much familiar with many aspects of IT security in cloud, email, infrastructure, and network, but also the processes around it, for example, incident response. I love experimenting. That's also why I dig into machine learning AI stuff lately. And this is a necessity in phishing. We come to that in the following slide. So it will be very exciting for me to dig into that topic. And yeah, that's me. Thank you for having me, Andy.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Umut. Appreciate it. Now, quick introduction about Hornet Security. Again, the organization that we work for, we really see ourselves as that next generation security provider for Microsoft 365, providing not only security, but backup compliance and security awareness services as well. And we see our mission in the space as being that trusted security provider that empowers organizations of all shapes and sizes to focus on what it is they do, while we take care of the security on their behalf, right? And we do that through kind of our comprehensive cloud security solution for 365, which I mentioned, which again includes email security, compliance, and backup, and more. One thing that kind of always surprises folks when I'm having conversations like this is how long we've been around. We've been around since 2007. So a company got its start back in 2007, began the process of internationalization in 2008, and as we've stepped along through the years, we've made a number of strategic acquisitions to really round out that security portfolio to, again, allow us to be that trusted security vendor while you focus on what it is that your organization does. And kind of along the same vein here, you know, same thing. People are surprised when they find out that we are an international company. We have offices in Germany, which is where Umut and Yvonne are joining us from today. I'm here in the US. We've got offices in the UK, Spain, Malta, kind of all over the place. And same thing with data centers. We've got a fairly large data center footprint throughout the world as well. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the security lab here at Hornet Security. Mainly because this is the group that actually put together the cybersecurity report. And if you are interested in getting a copy of the cybersecurity report, we will be sending that to you in a follow-up mailer, so you'll get a copy of that. And again, like I said, this is the organization or the sub organization within Hornet Security that's put this report together. And the security lab really consists of an international team of software engineers, data scientists, and security specialists, right? And we're responsible for the 24/7 monitoring of all of these security solutions here at Hornet Security. Now, just some example figures of the data that we are able to gather through some of our services here, right? And these might be dated here. Umut could probably talk to me a little bit about this, but these figures here might be a little bit dated, but they're still shocking nonetheless. And that 33,000 new email-based threats observed on an average day, roughly 13,000 ransomware attacks per hour, 361 sophisticated phishing attacks per minute, and 8 multi-vector fraud attacks per minute. That's pretty high when you think about it. So anyway, again, just an example of some of the statistics that we are able to get from our data. And we've got others that we're going to show you here in just a second as well. We also have a podcast that we do out of the security lab here at Hornet Security as well, called the Security Swarm Podcast. So if you're interested in today's discussion, we have a lot of discussions like this on a weekly basis over at the podcast, which you can consume on your podcasting platform of choice. And I've had both Yvonne and Umut as victims, co-hosts, I mean, on that podcast. So anyway, let's get to our cybersecurity report. What do you think, Umut, Yvonne? Should we dig into this?
Absolutely.
All right. So I want to start by talking about our methodology here. And the basis for the cybersecurity report comes from an analysis of more than 45 billion emails. That's not a typo, billion emails. That's the amount of emails that have passed through our security services during the data period for this report. Now, the data period for this report was November 1st, 2022 to November 1st, 2023. So a full year of data, right? And at a high level, what we found as part of this this report here, and again, you can grab a copy of that from the URL down there at the bottom. Again, you'll get a follow-up mailer with that information as well too, or you can just go out to our website and grab it there as well. But the core high-level stat that we've got here is that 36.4% of those 45 billion emails were classified as unwanted. Now that could be spam, rejected mails, threats, advanced threats. We're going to get into the categorization, but generally pieces of email that were unwanted, right? And when we break that down, 36.4% comes out to roughly 16.4 billion emails that were unwanted, right? Which is a bit of a shocking figure there. And other key data included in this report, like I mentioned, we've got that malicious versus clean emails. We've got the threat types that we'll talk about more here shortly. We also look at the file types that are used in email attacks for the delivery of malicious payloads. So, you know, what types of files are attached and what are they trying to do from a threat actor perspective. What brands are most impersonated, because brand impersonation is a very popular style of attack, especially when we're talking about phishing. We go into the, we have a metric we call the industry threat index, which is basically a metric that tells us how many threats are being sent against certain industries. That's a really cool metric. We're going to talk about that. And then also in the report, we go into the analysis and commentary of security incidents from 2023. And well, I feel like I'm saying this every year now. It was a doozy of a year for security incidents. And then we also get into security guidance and predictions for 2024 as well, because 'tis the season, right, to make predictions for the coming year. So let's start digging into this data. And Umut and Yvonne, the first thing I want to start with is just a general feeling here, right, about the state of the email security industry. Because again, as I mentioned, we saw through our data that 16.4 billion emails of the emails we analyzed were unwanted. And our data showed that 96.4 of those, fairly high percentage, were marked as spam or flat out rejected because of external indicators, right? Either the sender IP was known as bad or the domain was known as bad. So we don't even look at it. We just reject it because we know it's bad, right? So out of all of those unwanted emails, which again comes out to 16.4 billion, we saw that 3.6% was classified as malicious, right? Threats or advanced threats. And somebody just kind of looking at this graphic on the right-hand side of the slide here is like, oh, 3.6% isn't that bad, right? Well, when you break that down, you do the math here. So again, unwanted emails account for 16.4 billion. 3.6% of those 16.4 billion still comes out to 590 million malicious emails. And then I took it a step further. I'm like, okay, let's assume I'm a threat actor. I'm sending these emails and I have a success rate of 0.5%. I'm going to guess it's probably higher than that in the real world, but conservatively, let's say I have a success rate of 0.5%. That's still nearly 3 million victims that I have impacted as part of that, right? So when I break it down like that, what is your general feeling on the current state of email security? And Yvonne, I'll pick on you first.
Yeah, 3.6% doesn't sound much. If you run the numbers, it is much. And what I also have to say is one malicious email is enough to ruin your company. If that's the evil email that gets your whole data encrypted, that keeps you from operating your business, one email is enough. And with that, having that in mind, I think those numbers are really shocking. And I think there's always this discussion, is spam rising? It doesn't have to be rising. Even if it gets smarter, that's probably even worse, because the math, that's not really the issue. If you have a spam filter, it will filter it out. But the malicious ones, the smart ones, the spear phishing attacks, those are the ones who really, really hurt you. Everything else is at most a waste of time. But in the end, if 1/3 of your traffic is not something you want to have and you have to sort it out manually, it's also something that keeps you from working a lot. So I think those numbers are really impressive and shocking at the same time.
Right, definitely. Umut, what's your take?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I would like to dig into the difference between the unwanted and clean emails. I had this exact same discussion some days ago with someone who represents a bigger company with over 100,000 users. So the guy mentioned to me, look, I have 80% clean emails in my company, right? So why do I need to take care of anti-spam? So there's no risk anymore. And the reason for that is the general development over the recent years. So people use bigger cloud services that send a lot of emails. Because of that, the portion of clean emails is actually became bigger over recent years than the unwanted emails. So this can be quite misleading when people look into the email statistics over the holistic email statistics, meaning also internal emails. So this is also something that we take into account when doing this analysis. We always also take the internal traffic within the company, within a tenant, into account to calculate these numbers. And going back to what Yvonne mentioned, threats became actually more sophisticated over recent years. And also, as Yvonne mentioned, one email is more than enough to ruin a company, and one email can lead to many more threat emails. So once your email inbox is infected, once the client is infected, the client can also start spreading malicious emails. And we have seen that in the past with some malwares like Emotet, for example. Super sophisticated malware, no longer with us, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Okay, fortunately. Actually, it also stole real emails from the victim's inbox and reused it for other kinds of attacks. So really, these numbers can be misleading, but the risk is still there, and email security is still super important. It's the main attack vector in most cybersecurity incidents.
Right, as email and the human factor of email, right? You know, and both of you mentioned the same thing, in that one email is enough, right? And there's an image I've come across on the net over the years, and I should have included it here, but basically it's a 2-frame picture, right? In the left-hand frame, you've got this knight in armor. I mean, just completely decked out, steel helmet, steel plate armor, and just a little tiny spot in his visor where you can see. And then, you know, the armor is labeled, you know, my company's IT security posture. In the next frame, there's an arrow sticking out of that little visor, and it's, you know, that one user that clicked an email, right? So how true that statement is, right? So which I guess this is a good segue into our next data point, is that when we do our analysis, we look at, like, okay, what are the attack techniques in this chunk of emails? Again, 45 billion emails, right? And so we do this analysis every year. So what's nice about this is we can kind of see how the trends change year over year. And what we found is that phishing this year, during this data period, accounts for 43.3% of email-based attacks. And that's a nearly 4 percentage point increase from last year. That's a percentage point. So again, if you're looking at the whole pie, you know, phishing is a larger portion of the pie this year than it was last year. If you're just looking for the percentage increase of phishing year over year, I think it was like 9.3 or 4 when I did the math. But again, when we're talking about percentage points and the portion of the pie that phishing is, you know, speaking in rough math terms, it's nearly half, right? So, Umut, what's your take on that? I don't think there's any surprise here, right?
Not at all. No, people are after, so over the recent years, anti-malware solutions became quite sophisticated too. And now people start using social engineering techniques on emails too for phishing. And one aspect of phishing that also increased by quite a large margin is the use of QR codes in phishing emails. So we are observing that, especially now, given that the holiday season starts, we see more QR codes in phishing emails. And this is a technique that this is a big trend now that the phishers use to circumvent many security solutions also. So given that most users more or less think that QR codes can't be malicious, they simply scan it using their mobile devices and then enter their credentials, for example, get phished easily by this. This circumvents many security solutions, and this is one of the reasons why phishing is becoming so huge.
And it's strange, right? Because I mean, the QR code, and maybe this is just an assumption I have, but I feel like for your average end user, maybe seeing this QR code almost adds an air of authenticity to the email, right? So they're like, we, as a society, we've just gotten used to scanning QR codes to, you know, do things like eating at a restaurant. You know, I'll be sitting at a restaurant with my wife or my folks, and you know, they're all weird when I'm like, I don't want to scan the QR code, you know, because I know, okay, that's a possible threat vector, right? And they think I'm crazy, but it's kind of interesting that that breakdown. Yvonne, what are your thoughts?
If I can jump in 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, Yvonne.
Go ahead.
It's a quite good example with the restaurant, right? So in Eastern countries, you're all probably familiar with WeChat, the mobile app. Many restaurants actually use QR codes to get the payment. And in that regard, there are also scammers who replace the QR code within the restaurant with their own QR code. So they get the payment, not the restaurant. So the ubiquity is what distracts the users, right? So they think it's a legit QR code. It can't be anything wrong with that. And this is also why the success rate of these attacks is so high.
Right. And it's just, it's one of the things of modern society that maybe has, I mean, they're useful, don't get me wrong, but attackers are going to take any vector of attack they can get, that's for sure. So Yvonne, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting because maybe 10 years ago, QR codes were not really common. At least in Europe, no one used QR codes. And I know startups who had to pivot to other products because QR codes were not really accepted by end users. And I think with COVID, the latest, it became common to either register somewhere with a QR code or get the menu or even pay with using a link via QR code. And suddenly, now that it's common, it's automatically trusted. And that's a common mistake. And that, I mean, the same thing happened with SMS as a second factor for MFA or something. As soon as the technology is common, it is trusted until proven otherwise, and that's really a scary mechanism of our minds.
That's a good point. And the other thing it makes me think of, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit more later, is I think of OAuth prompts in Microsoft 365. You know, like, hey, I'm an end user. I found this nifty calendar add-on, and oh yeah, I want to use it. Install, and they get that OAuth prompt that's like, oh hey, this application needs access to this, and this inside of your M365 tenant. Users have just been unintentionally trained to just click accept in order to get their job done, right? And I feel like it's kind of the same mentality, which is, well, it's not making us any safer, that's for sure.
So. Yes, yeah. On the other hand, then now you have to enter a 2-digit number to really make sure that you saw the request and that it matches what you are expecting. So they're trying to adjust the technology to these new threats as well. So I think there's a lot going on, but I'm quite happy to learn that I'm not the only person thinking twice when I see a QR code in a restaurant.
Yep, yeah, it's the same here. I just like I'm like I feel old-fashioned sometimes because I'm like, you guys have physical menus somewhere, and like the server kind of sighs at me, and I feel bad, but like anyway. So, well, the other statistic on this particular screen I wanted to look at and talk about with you guys a little bit further is there was quite a rise in the use of malicious URLs in terms of attack techniques go. Anything you want to add on that particular point, Umut?
In regards to URLs, we have seen this trend for the recent years already. So most attackers switch from using attachments to URLs instead and host the payload somewhere else. This way they can circumvent some traditional anti-spam or anti-malware solutions, which just scan email attachments, for example. Something that we also observe in regards to URLs is the use of some kind of web application firewalls, for example, CloudFront, right? So some solutions actually attempt to pull the payload, but can't do that because the payload, the malicious payload, is protected by a third-party service. So attackers become very clever in that regard. It's a general trend that we see. URL will most likely remain with us for the following years. It's just a common technique quite often used.
Gotcha. And the other thing that I've seen is, you know, when the attacker sends through the malicious URL, it may not necessarily be armed at that stage, right? And then they'll arm it later on to try and circumvent the scanning in between, you know, the point of sending and the point of receipt as well, right? So that's kind of another thing that I think of when I see that statistic there. Before we move on to the next point, Yvonne, anything you wanna add there?
No, actually, I want to add to the next point. The advanced fee scam is really funny that we have an increase in that, because for me it's the traditional old school Nigerian prince saying, give me money and you will get millions. And it's funny that it never dies out and that it even increased by nearly 1% point.
I know, that is very interesting, right? I guess the oldies never die, right? So, and maybe it's easy for me to say this because I've been involved in security for a couple of years now. Is like I have a hard time believing people still fall for that, but they must. So
they must,
because they keep.
I mean, they're sending it because they make money with it, so it must still work.
Must still work, definitely. So. All right, interesting stuff there. So we will move on to our next point here. And then again, folks, if you have questions or comments, be sure to get those into the questions form. So Paul kind of messaged in with a comment here. Paul says, I changed my QR reader setup recently to display the URL with a confirm instead of opening the website directly, which at least allows you a visual check of the URL before checking, right? So I mean, that's kind of taking the traditional, like inspecting the URL on your PC or something before you actually go out to the link, or like I do sometimes, is like, okay, I'm not sure of that URL, throw it into VirusTotal really quick. But, you know, scanning QR codes, being able to look at it beforehand is really useful, definitely. So good suggestion there, Paul. So, excuse me. So the other thing we look at, like I mentioned earlier, is we also look at what types of files are being used to deliver malicious payloads inside of email attacks. And the two standouts during our data period here was HTML files and PDF files. And Umut, you and I have discussed both of these on various podcast episodes over the last year, but what are your thoughts on this? I mean, we got a pretty significant increase in both of these. You know, we've got 16 percentage point increase in HTML and like an 11 percentage point increase in PDFs. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would connect this increase with the decrease of Office-related file types. So we have seen some changes introduced by Microsoft in regards to macro-enabled documents. So macros are disabled by default now, and this led to a significant decrease of Office documents used in attacks. And however, the number increased for HTML and PDF documents. One of the reasons why I believe the HTML and PDF documents will now stay with us for a longer period is, one, their ubiquity. So people are used to these file formats. They are quite common. Most people associate trustworthiness with these file formats too. People get lots of PDF reports. Some services also send HTML reports. And you can open these file types with your browser, with your default browser. So it's super easy for an attacker to deliver actual malicious payload. Or it doesn't need to be malicious, right? So most of these documents also just contain links to phishing sites, for example. But however, they can be opened with almost any kind of client, because the standard web browser supports these file types. With Office, you didn't have this. So the user actually needed to have Microsoft Office installed, an actual license and so on. Now with HTML and PDF, you have the easy way to just deliver the malware, the malicious document, and the client can just click on it and open it.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter what the platform or operating system is anymore, right? Typically, both of those file types can be opened by Mac, Windows, Linux.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't know how many average end users are running Linux, but still, the point stands. Interesting. Yvonne, anything you want to add?
Yes, I think also both file types are so versatile. You can put anything into it. You can run JavaScript within PDF files. PDF as a format has always been very, portable document format, of course, but it has also been very misused even by normal PDF generators. So even if you would do some basic checks, most of PDFs which are not harmful would fail because PDF generators really make a lot of interesting things with it. So you can't really rely on metadata being correct. I think both formats really allow for many degrees of freedom on what to embed and how.
Right. All right. Well, Umut, I'm glad that you brought up the Excel and the Word statistic there, because those used to be used quite frequently, right? Malicious macros and then those types of documents. So arguably, it was a good change from Microsoft to disable macros by default. The other thing that I want to point out on this particular chart is the 8 percentage point decrease in the use of archive files, your zips, your RARs, your 7-zip files. It's still high at 20.8%, sure, but that's an 8 percentage point decrease. And I mean, we've seen those file types used a lot over the years. I'm probably putting you on the spot with this one, Umut, but any thoughts on that decrease that you want to mention off the top of your head?
I think there's no specific reason for the decrease. Probably this just happens because of the high adoption rate of HTML and PDF file formats. In the past, we have seen malicious archive files as a use to obfuscate other file types, right? So people would add Word, Excel documents to these archive files and then send it so that the anti-malware solution can't scan it. Often we also saw these archive files not actually encrypted, sorry, so that the user would need to enter some kind of password to open the archive. So this also happened quite a lot.
Interesting. Before we move on to the next point, Yvonne, anything you want to add before we step away from these stats?
No, Umut answered it perfectly.
Okay. Sounds good.
Maybe from my side, one interesting thing that I also see here is the increase of OneNote file documents. We've also seen this since the beginning of the year, and I believe this could be something that will follow us in the following years. OneNote is a very interesting file format that allows you to embed almost any kind of other files into it and to execute it. So this could lead to some tricky and creative uses of delivering malware.
That's a good point too. Not only from that perspective, but I could also see it being used from a threat actor point of view. Let's say I've already infiltrated an organization and I'm trying to achieve privilege escalation, and I find a shared OneNote somewhere that the engineering team uses for something. Maybe I could embed a phishing URL inside of that OneNote to give it an air of authenticity, right?
Yep.
I don't want to be giving people ideas, but just that's where my brain went anyway. So that will be an interesting one to watch as we step through the coming year here. So good spot there, Umut. Good spot. So, all right, I want to move on to brand impersonation, because like I mentioned earlier in the session today, is that when we talk about email-based threats and phishing specifically, brand impersonation is a popular attack vector, right? And so on the right-hand side here, we've got our top 10 most impersonated brands from our data period, right? From our 45 billion emails. So right at the top, you see DHL, shipping company DHL, and there's a number of reasons for that, why we'll get into it here in a second. I wanted to point out the 18.5 other. other is basically just a culmination of all the other organizations that were not large enough to themselves be on this list. So then the other big heavy hitters we see here: Amazon, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Netflix, FedEx. So I guess maybe we should start with shipping companies. You know, Yvonne, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on why shipping companies like DHL, FedEx tend to be on this list on a regular basis?
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I tend to order a lot on, which also probably explains Amazon, because I'm probably not the only one. And so that I get an email from a shipping company happens on a daily basis. So I expect emails from shipping companies, and DHL is like the most common one in Germany. So nearly every day I get an email from DHL that I'm expecting, and they are very well made, so you don't really see the difference. And if you're expecting an email, you're more likely to click on it. I think one of the samples was that you have to pay €1.99 of additional taxes on something. Something similar actually happened when I tried to return a package to UK. Only that it was €50 and it was real, but thanks Brexit. So you just get an email that you expect, and the probability that you click on it is really there. And shipping companies are just the type of emails you expect, Amazon as well, and this FedEx in the international and US market, of course. And it's the same thing with Netflix. Netflix changed the pricing in several countries, and then suddenly there were those emails claiming, okay, we changed the pricing, but if you click here, you get 6 months for free. And it's kind of this expected conversation that happens to you, and you're more likely to fall for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's like you're expecting those notices to show up, right? So same thing here. I think we've got a package being delivered on our doorstep probably, well, right now because of the holidays, probably 5 days a week practically, right? So it's not unusual to see those messages. The other thing I've seen an uptick along these same lines, another thing I've seen an uptick of here, and at least in the States, maybe it's the same over in Europe, is I'm now starting to see these types of communications via smishing. So they'll come in via SMS on my phone, right? You know, oh hey, yeah, gotcha. So it's pretty universal. I figured it was, but it's like, okay, click here to verify your delivery window or something like that, you know. And I'm like, yeah, how about no? So Umut, anything you want to add on that point?
Yeah, just adding some context. So when we talk about brand impersonation, we also need to think about the attack type of these kinds of brand impersonations, right? So why are these brands used, and how are they used to achieve what kind of goal? And in regards to DHL, we have seen a large chunk of phishing emails, not only asking for credentials, but also for personal information. Like actually, what's your mother's name, so that the attacker can use it to get into banking details too, to reset passwords and so on. So things like this. And something that I would also like to mention is Netflix. Yvonne mentioned that in regards to pricing. So the phishers impersonate brands at the right time when the users expect emails from the services, right? And Netflix increased the prices this year, and users were expecting some kind of notification about that. We have seen phishing emails using this context to try to phish people. So the emails would lead the user to some kind of price increases. The user would obviously need to log into the system. When the user does it, the account is gone. It's a different kind of price increase, obviously, but not what the user expected. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's the same with DHL, right? So people always expect notifications from DHL because nowadays we order a lot online and always expect these notifications, especially during the holiday season now. I expect an increase of phishing emails from DHL, Amazon, eBay, and other retailer sites. So this is quite common.
Right. Yeah, definitely interesting to see the trends there. So Well, we've got about 20 minutes left. I've got other data points I want to make sure we cover that are also very very interesting. I was reading the industry word on the slide while I was saying that. Anyway, the next thing I wanted to talk about was our industry threat index. And basically, the data we look at here, like I said, is we're able to determine which industry verticals are more of a target than others. And so what you're seeing here on the right-hand side of the screen is kind of the breakdown. And if you're interested in how the math is, how we come up with this score for each industry, go ahead and check out the full report. We've got all the math built right in, so you can actually see how we come up with these figures. Basically, what we see here and what I notice when I look at this, and I'd love to get your guys' take on this, but I see that in terms of score, if we take logistics, the logistics industry away as an outlier, we're within a point in every other industry. And to me, when I look at this, it tells me that, like, okay, it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. If you have the ability to pay a ransom or threat actors can siphon money out of you in some way, shape, or form, you're a target, right? And I mean, we can see that there are some industries that are targeted more than others: research, entertainment, manufacturing, but it's not like vastly higher than the others. What do you guys think? Umut, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So we see the global media more or less represents the current state, right? So across many industries. And nonetheless, we see the research industry at the top of attacked industry sectors. And this has various reasons. Obviously, people are after research results, after intellectual property, and so on. However, what we also need to think about here is the context of the attack, right? So there are different types of attacks. Some industries get more the bulk of attacks that are not so sophisticated. When we think about healthcare, finance, and so on, these are the sectors that get a lot of spear phishing emails, more sophisticated attacks, ransomware attacks. Especially we've seen that in the news, right? So some healthcare insurance companies and so on got attacked by ransomware. So this is also what we have to keep in mind when we talk about the targeted industry sectors. The threat actors that target specific industries always have this in mind, so they use different techniques for each kind of industry.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to see the breakdown there for sure, and great insight there as well. Yvonne, anything you want to add?
Yes, maybe from the research industry perspective, I've been working in the public area of research, and I can assure you there is no money, but the search for intellectual property, for research results, that's really something that is out there and happening, and most universities don't expect to get attacked because they say we don't have any money. Yeah, at least one university in my hometown has been attacked lately, and I think they had to stop all IT services for several weeks to really recover. It was a ransomware attack, so not really phishing for research results, but just accidentally ransomware and no ransom payment out there. But it's really happening, and sometimes it just happens because they just throw it out to everyone, and sometimes it's really attacks that are completely detailed to that specific company.
Right.
And yeah, maybe the outcome of it is just don't think you're not important enough to not get attacked.
Right. I think that's the key takeaway, right? Is like, don't think you won't be a target, right? And I think a lot of organizations fall into that trap still, but it's well, it's the reality of our world now, right? So, well, the time we have left, I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about the major security incidents that happened in 2023. So like I mentioned earlier, 2023 was an interesting year in terms of security incidents, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. There were far more security incidents than these 6 that we have up on the screen here, but these are ones that we felt warranted discussion They warranted some analysis in the cybersecurity reports. We've talked about, I think, all of these, with the exception of maybe NoAuth. I don't think we've covered NoAuth in a podcast episode. But these were all significant security incidents throughout 2023. And I think maybe the first one we start on, because it most closely ties in with the email security discussion we've been having, is the disruption of QuakeBot. Quackbot, QuakeBot, I've heard people say it so many different ways. QBot, I just call it QuakeBot. Anyway, that's what I'm sticking with. But what was it, July? I think it was July this year, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, you guys. But July this year, we saw that the law enforcement agencies of the world were able to essentially disrupt and shut down the QuakeBot botnet, which was a huge undertaking. It was really interesting how they did that as well too. You and I think we talked about that kind of a little bit about how they did it during a podcast episode. But overall, for the industry, this is a great thing, right? I mean, it's a big move. It's a big win for law enforcement agencies. We put some threat actors on their back feet, at least for a little bit. Yvonne, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the disruption of QuakeBot?
Yeah, it's a great success. Like every time when bigger botnets are gone, congrats to everybody involved. Good job. For me, interesting is QuakeBot was mainly using HTML and PDF documents, and still, although it was disrupted in April, we still have these increases. So it's really interesting that others have found that access away as well. So that's really interesting. And the big question is, now that QuakeBot is gone, who are going to be the next ones? Because we had the same with Umut. We were like guessing, and I think we were right, who will be next. And it's an arms race in the end of authorities and the threat actors.
It's really interesting to see, because it really, whenever this happens, it really does create a vacuum, right? Because now it's like, threat actors aren't just going to pack up and go home, right? They're not going to be like, well, QuakeBot's gone, I'm done.
More money for me.
Right, like that's not going to happen. So that's always the big question, is where are they going to go, right? And Umut, maybe you can comment on this a little bit more. We've seen Darkgate kind of step up, and I don't want to say is filling that void, but is maybe a contender. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So in my opinion, when we talk about Crackbot, we don't have to think about some small piece of malware, but an actual business, right? So these guys, the threat actors, were some kind of service providers to other threat actors who would like to deliver their payload using the Crackbot malware. And now the CIA disrupted the services of Crackbot. They took down a lot of botnet components, but and some parts of the group too. However, there are still people around from the Crackbot group, and need to ask the question, what happens with them, right? So they look for alternatives, but also their previous customers also look for alternatives. You mentioned Darkgate, for example. So now Darkgate came up as an alternative to Crackbot to deliver payloads to victims, and this is, I think you also described in one of the previous podcasts, a cat and mouse game. So there will always be an option, there will always be a group providing the best possible service to deliver your payload to victims, and this is a niche that certain threat actors try to fill. Yeah, and it's quite funny, right? Because Quackbot actually had a ticket system for their customers, so they used it was a regular customer engaging business. So they had customer success teams, a service desk team, developer teams split across the world, and so on. So it was quite sophisticated.
I laugh because of how absurd it is, right? Just like, okay, you're stealing money from people, and like, oh, hey, here's a ticketing system to help with that process. But at the same time, to your point, just how organized and sophisticated that whole operation is kind of shocking, to be completely frank. So definitely interesting. The other thing I wanted to talk about here is the MoveIt breach is a big one. I wish we had time to dig into that one more, because that has been, I guess, the gift that keeps on giving for threat actors throughout this year, right? But I wanted to, again, kind of in sticking with the theme of our email security, talk about Storm 0558 and continued exchange vulnerabilities. So those are both Microsoft-centric issues, right? And we've kind of seen a trend over the last couple of years of, I don't think they're coming from a place of not caring, but I'm not saying that at all. I guess how I want to say it is, Microsoft has been stumbling a lot in terms of security, right? So if I look at this session from last year, I remember we talked about exchange vulnerabilities in last year's cybersecurity report. So it's very clear that on-premises Exchange Server is not getting the love and care that it needs, which makes sense. Microsoft is very focused on 365. I don't think it's a good thing, but it makes sense that they're super focused on 365. Which then brings me to Storm 0558, which is basically the threat actor group that Microsoft has identified as Chinese nation state threat actors. The quick breakdown of that attack was those threat actors were able to procure a Microsoft consumer signing key. And we've got that whole breakdown in the cybersecurity report, kind of how that happened. But they were basically to take that signing key and forge their own authentication tokens into Microsoft cloud services. And this, the big impacted organization, and the organization that discovered this flaw in the first place, it wasn't Microsoft, but it was the US State Department that was impacted, and they discovered this flaw. And to make matters worse for Microsoft, you couldn't even detect this flaw, this issue, unless you were paying for the premium logging tier and your Microsoft cloud services. So like I said, they've stumbled a lot on security over the past year. And I wish we had time to have a conversation about this concept of vendor over dependence, utilizing the same vendor for productivity solutions as for security solutions, and whether that's a good thing or not. But really quick, I want to get your guys' take on these two things. Yvonne, I'll start with you.
Yes, I think Microsoft really has a hard job because everyone is focusing on them. On the one hand, customers, for everything they do, Microsoft becomes a solution, which right. Has its business benefits. But on the other hand, threat actors really attack Microsoft because of the adoption rate. Right. I mean, it's really worthwhile to hack into Microsoft because everyone is in Microsoft. So where's the money? You go there, and so I think we can already predict that attacks on Microsoft, on the one hand, supply chain attack, on the other hand, of course, the good old Exchange that no one wants to patch anymore.
Right.
And this will continue, and the Microsoft Cloud is subject to attacks and will be in the future because of the big cloud adoption that is currently happening. And I'm not telling people not to use Microsoft. It's great for productivity, but yeah, be aware and have a second layer of security in place.
Definitely. Umut, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely agree with Yvonne, and I think we can also put Quackbot in context with Microsoft. When Quackbot got disrupted, we got intel on how they do their quality assurance, right? So what Yvonne mentioned is quite important. Quackbot actually also tested their solutions continuously against M365 to check if they can bypass the filters, for example, because of the high adoption rate. And besides that, something that's not listed here, also quite critical, but not related to a cyber security attack, more or less a configuration issue, was also the leak of the 38 terabytes of data linked to the AI training at Microsoft, right? So this also proves that you don't really need to have a cyber security attack in order to have some kind of incident. It can also be a configuration issue, and this became super complex over time at Microsoft. I mean, if I create an M365 tenant, I have many administration panels. I feel like I actually need a PhD for each panel to be able to administrate, right?
True.
And on top of that, I also have the Azure panel that more or less interacts with all of them, with the roles, permissions, and so on. So it's become so complicated that not even the vendor itself can properly configure the cloud storage solutions. So this is something that people also need to keep in mind. The cloud adoption rate is quite high. Threat actors always test their solutions against it. Solutions, I mean malware. So I think solutions is a quite nice term for that. And managing these cloud solutions is becoming super complex. So administrators need proper training and so on. So this is also something that organizations always need to keep in mind.
All good points. All good points. Yeah, I had forgotten about that was a misconfiguration in Azure storage account, if I remember correctly. And yeah, 38 terabytes of data. If I remember right, there were secrets as well as internal Teams communications contained in that dump of data as well too. And like you said, it wasn't even a security issue in terms of an attack. It was just a misconfiguration, which, yeah, we could probably spend a whole webinar talking about the complexity of the cloud and how it's, you know, it's not great for security. Complexity is never great for security, right? So anyway, well, before we sign off today, kind of the key thing I want to wrap up with here is get each of your opinions on what do you think is going to happen in the coming year and how can organizations prepare? Umut, I'll start with you.
Sure. So we talked about the file formats already. So I still believe that file formats that can be opened by any type of client, so be it a Mac, Windows device, Android device, iOS, and so on, will be super trendy. HTML and PDF, for example. Phishing will continue to be in trend. We will see more social engineering attacks, more adoption of QR codes, I believe. This is for sure. So I would bet my house that we will get to see more QR codes and phishing emails. And social engineering in the aspect that we will get more adoption of large language models in regards to social engineering attacks. So things like ChatGPT are quite good at generating well-done phishing emails, and we will see more of this. So actually right now you can also train your own model to generate phishing models. It's super easy. And the simplicity of that is also something that is quite important for a threat actor. The operations need to be cheap and efficient, so they have both with that. AI in general will be a huge topic, especially deepfakes. So we see in regards to deepfakes, more and more commercial solutions also. I think Tencent started it this year. So you need, I think it was 3 minutes of video material of a person and a few sentences spoken from a person, $145, and then you can get an AI avatar of that specific person hosted by Tencent. Some days ago, Microsoft also announced something like this. So obviously, threat actors can also abuse these kind of commercial services for deepfakes. But in general, creating a deepfake is super easy. You just go to GitHub, search for a deepfake project, download it, and within 2 minutes, you can create a deepfake today already. Yeah, what else? Misconfiguration of cloud storages leading to security incidents. This will probably always happen and still be an issue given that people switch from on-prem to the cloud.
Yeah, definitely all valid predictions, I think. And yeah, the commercially generated avatars for $145, I could have a version of me that's not terrifying or anything. Anyway, how can organizations prepare, you think, Umut? What can they do to kind of get ready for some of these threats?
In regards to deepfakes, there is really no solution that protects employees. So employees really need proper training to detect deepfakes. Think about messengers like WhatsApp, for example. There is no way to integrate a security solution in there which scans your video call, right? So the same goes for GoToWebinar and Zoom and so on. So it's really hard to implement the security solutions there. Because of that, training employees is super important. Also in regards to QR codes, teach your employees how to handle QR codes. We have seen a nice recommendation here in the chat already, so this is super convenient. phishing is becoming more trendy, training employees is super important. And in regards to the misconfigured cloud solutions, companies need to prioritize training administrators properly to manage these solutions, or seek solutions that actually manage the other solutions for you and simplify it some kind of extra layer. So this is also quite important.
Good advice. Good advice. Yvonne, you've got the last word. What are your predictions for 2024, and how can organizations prepare?
Yeah, in addition to that, I would like to mention supply chain attacks. I think those will increase again because it's just so convenient to really go into the very basic part, and it's really hard as a customer to really prepare against this kind of attacks. Or again, right. Embedding a third-party security solution whenever you use cloud services should be a common practice. Also, I think attacks on MFA will increase. There are these MFA bypass kits that you can also get really cheap, and that really helps not really skilled threat actors do their attacks and yeah, basically disable your MFA. Yeah, not just relying on MFA, also on additional factors like, I don't know, IP ranges from certain countries. And in the end, again, the end user is the one where basically the action happens, and I have to agree with Umut, training the end user is really crucial because you can secure whatever you want. The weakest link will also always be the human, and it's your responsibility as a company to really take care that they get the best training and skill set that they can achieve.
It's good advice. Good advice. Yeah, the one thing you mentioned also made me think of. You mentioned about 2FA, right? I see it so often that attackers are increasingly going after the session token now. Mm-hmm. So like evil proxy. I don't think we talked about evil proxy on this webinar yet, but you know, that's a phishing kit that helps threat actors obtain targets session token, which then bypasses MFA, right? And it's those. I mean, MFA is good. It's great. Don't get me wrong.
Yes.
And
always
every
have it
organization,
in place, but don't just trust this. Yeah.
Exactly. It's not the solution to everything, right?
Yeah,
so
just my minimum.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So threat actors are just, to your point of more attacks at MFA. Attackers are starting to and trying to work their way around it, right? Because they know more people are using it now. So anyway, well, I want to thank you both for spending some time today to share your knowledge and insights. And both of you mentioned, you know, providing training solutions for end users. You mentioned, you know, email security solutions. We do have all of those types of solutions in our stack here at Hornetsecurity. Surprise, right? So anyway, if you're interested in any of these products, I know we're about out of time, but if you're interested in any of these, you can go out to hornetsecurity.com for more information. We have multiple tiered plans here with varying degrees of functionality, from just basic spam malware protection down at plan 1 to all the bells and whistles. You get full feature protection for your M365 tenant in plan 4, along with security awareness services, which we talked about in our recommendations, as well as some compliance features as well. Fantastic product. Highly recommend you check that out. I want to leave a little bit of time for any questions. You know, I did have somebody mentioned regarding the QR codes at restaurants. Good tip to not just blindly trust those, right? I think that's one that I come across frequently. But if other than that, if anybody has any questions or comments, I'll give you about 30 seconds to get those into the questions form. Or if you think about this after the fact and you think of a question later on that you want to ask myself, Yvonne, or Umut, you can always email me at andy@hornetsecurity.com. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you spell my last name, just andy@hornetsecurity.com. We'll get you into my inbox if you think of a question after the fact. But I know we're over time, and I think we've covered just about everything. Before I sign off, you guys, anything you want to add before we sign off? No? Good?
Thanks for having us, Andy.
Definitely. Thanks, Umut. Thanks, Yvonne. Appreciate you guys being here. And all of you watching, Thanks for hanging out with us today. Stay safe out there. We hope to see you again for a future Hornet Security webinar. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.